The Truth About Silence, a fictional story of reclaiming identity. The rain drummed against the window of a San Francisco cafe, each drop blurring the city into a watercolor of gray and gold. I was 29, sitting alone at a corner table, my hands wrapped around a coffee gone cold. The steam had long faded, like the dreams I'd poured into a tech startup I'd helped build. This fictional story isn't about fate or predestination. It's about the moment my world collapsed. They kicked me out of the company I created. I whispered to the empty chair across from me, the words carrying the truth nobody dares to speak. They erased my name, dismissed my ideas, and reduced my identity to a footnote. But I made sure they never pitched again. I wasn't just the PR girl, as they sneered behind my back. I was a co-founder, the one who'd secured our first investors, crafted our story, and stayed up until dawn debugging our vision. I'd stood in boardrooms, my voice steady, convincing skeptics to bet on our software, a tool to streamline supply chains, elegant as poetry. What they didn't know was the semantic embedding of my power. I held a 20% stake through a family venture capital fund, discreetly registered under my sister Emma's name. They thought I was a decoration, a smiling face for their pitch decks. They were wrong. That rainy afternoon, shame burned my cheeks like a fever. The cafe smelled of burnt espresso and damp coats, its hum a cruel reminder of the world moving on without me. I saw their faces, my co-founders, all men, laughing in sleek offices, rewriting my legacy. "She's good for photos, not strategy," Mark had said at a meeting I wasn't invited to. The betrayal wasn't just professional, it was personal, like losing a family I'd chosen. I remembered our early days, coding in a cramped garage, sharing cheap pizza and big dreams, Mark's laughter filling the room. How had it come to this? My savings were thin, my rent overdue, and now my identity was slipping away. The world outside moved on, but I was frozen, replaying their words. This wasn't predestination. It was their choice to betray me. As the rain fell, something stirred. A quiet resolve. I'd show them the truth about silence, the kind that speaks louder than screams. It wasn't just betrayal, it was scent. The sharp tang of burnt espresso lingering at the back of my throat, the acidic sting of cold pizza boxes from nights when we still dreamed together, the metallic taste of silence. Their absence wasn't a void, it was a smell, a weight, a texture that clung to my skin like humidity after a storm. The first wound came in a meeting, the fluorescent lights buzzing like a swarm of wasps. Our office was a maze of glass walls and ego, the kind of place where ambition drowned out kindness. I'd spent weeks researching a plan to expand into Asia, mapping markets, partners, and risks. My slides were crisp, my data airtight. "Here's how we can scale," I began, my voice steady. But before I could finish, Mark, sharp suits, sharper tongue, cut me off. "Let's leave strategy to the tech team," he said, not even glancing my way. The room went quiet, but it wasn't the silence of respect. It was the kind that erases you. My face flushed, my notes trembling in my hands, but I swallowed my words. The semantic embedding of their dismissal sank into my bones. I didn't belong. That night I lay awake, the city's hum seeping through my apartment's thin walls. My bank account was a ticking clock, rent due, savings dwindling. I'd moved to San Francisco with a suitcase and a dream, leaving my family's quiet support behind. Now that dream felt like a trap. I wanted to call Emma to hear her calm voice, but pride stopped me. She'd warned me about startup egos. I hadn't listened. Then my name vanished from the company website. I noticed it late one night, my laptop screen glowing in my tiny apartment. Where my bio once stood, co-founder, investor liaison, storyteller, was a blank space, a temporary oversight, they claimed when I emailed, their tone clipped and cold. But I saw it for what it was, corporate exclusion. A media partner, Sarah called the next day, her voice hesitant. "Why aren't you listed as a founder?" she asked. "She's working externally," they'd told her, a lie so smooth it felt rehearsed. I stared at my phone, the cursor blinking like a fading heartbeat, and wondered if I'd ever existed in their world. The worst came at a networking event, chandeliers glinting above a sea of suits. An investor I'd brought on board, a gray-haired man with a kind smile, clapped my shoulder. "You're the face of the company," he said, "but the guys handle the real work, right?" His laugh was warm, but it shattered me. I forced a smile, my throat tight, my heels pinching my feet. They'd painted me as a narcissist, a figurehead who didn't belong in the real work of code and strategy. Later, in my journal, I scribbled, "They called me selfish, but I'll show them the truth they feared." This wasn't just disrespect, it was a campaign to erase my reclaiming identity. I wanted to quit, to pack my bags and flee San Francisco's fog and its cutthroat dreams. The startup world felt like a foreign land, its skyscrapers looming with threat, its promises hollow. But something held me back, not anger, not pride, but a quiet resolve. My mother's voice echoed from childhood. Respect isn't given, it's earned in silence. That was the truth about quiet power. I wasn't invisible. I was waiting, biding my time, my heart steadying for the fight. The storm built slowly, each blow sharper, deeper, more deliberate. The first layer landed with a phone call from Sarah, the media contact who championed our story. "I'm confused," she said, her voice tight. "They told me you're no longer representing the company for the conference panel." I froze, my phone heavy in my hand, the hum of my apartment's fridge suddenly loud. "That's news to me," I managed, my voice cracking. They hadn't just sidelined me. They'd silenced my voice, cut me out of the narrative I'd written. I mumbled an excuse, promising to follow up, but the truth hit like a stone. They were rewriting the story, and I was the villain. That night, I paced my living room, the city lights mocking me through the window. I remembered our first press release, the thrill of seeing our name in print, Sarah's email praising my clarity. Now I was a stranger in my own dream. I saw Mark's grin from our early days, his hoodie slung over a chair in our garage office, the smell of burnt coffee as we brainstormed. We'd been a family, or so I thought. Those memories twisted like a knife, each one a reminder of my naivety. The world I'd built felt alien, its edges sharp with betrayal. The second layer was colder, more calculated. An email arrived at 2 a.m., the subject line stark. "Account access update." My heart sank as I read, "For security reasons, we've removed you from Slack and Google Drive." Security? I designed those systems, spent sleepless nights debugging workflows, my laptop balanced on a pillow. I tried to log in, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, pressing enter as if I could will myself back into existence. Access denied. My accounts were gone, my files locked, my presence erased. My pulse raced, not with fear, but with clarity. This wasn't predestination. It was arrogance. They thought I'd fade quietly, a ghost in their machine. I sat at my desk, the city asleep outside, my hands trembling not from anger, but from something stranger, a kind of detachment, like a shadow without a reflection. I wasn't the woman I'd been yesterday, the one who smiled through their slights. I was sharper now, my mind racing with plans, driven by reason, not emotion. I saw the truth nobody dares to speak. Their power was a house of cards, and I held the wind. I dug through old emails, piecing together their strategy. I found a thread between Mark and Tom, casual and cruel. "She's out of her depth. Let's clean house before the big pitch." Clean house. Me. The words stung, but they lit a fire. I wasn't fighting for my job, I was fighting for my reclaiming identity. Silence is not absence. Silence is not surrender. Silence is a stance, a preparation, a sharpened breath held before the wind shifts. Silence is not defeat. Silence is beginning. I called Emma that night, my voice steady despite the hour. "They're pitching to your fund next week," I said. She paused, then laughed softly. They have no idea, do they?" "No," I said. "But they will." Emma's voice turned serious. "Don't let this drag you down, kid. I'm VC, not your proxy for revenge." Her words stung, a reminder that my fight wasn't just with them, but with my own heart. "I'm not doing this for you," I said. "I'm doing it for me." She sighed. "Just be careful what you carry after." I hung up, her warning echoing. I wasn't sure if I was fighting for justice or pride, but I couldn't stop now. Justice? Or was it just my ego, bruised and bleeding, dressed up as righteousness? Was I still building something? Or was I just burning it all down to watch them squirm? I didn't know. And that scared me more than anything they'd ever done. The third layer was about my shares, the invisible thread that tied me to the company. A courier delivered a thick envelope to my apartment, the paper heavy with intent. Inside was a generous offer to buy out my stake for $10,000, a fraction of its value. The cover letter was polite, clinical, claiming I wasn't a legal co-founder because my name wasn't on the original paperwork. I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed off my bare walls. They didn't know the semantic embedding of my stake. The family fund I controlled, hidden behind Emma's name, held nearly 20% of the company. I'd signed those shares in late-night meetings, my signature a quiet promise to myself, my hands steady despite the chaos. Their offer wasn't a negotiation. It was an insult, a final attempt to erase me. I spent days replaying our early moments. Mark's grin when we landed our first client, the hoodie he'd left in the garage, still smelling of his cologne, Tom's shy toast at our first team party, the cake we'd burned but ate anyway. We'd been a family, or so I thought. Now, those memories felt like lies, each one a reminder of how I'd trusted them. I wanted to scream, to storm their office and demand answers, but I held back. My mother's words returned. "Silence is your strength." I leaned into it, letting my anger cool into resolve. I wasn't fighting for their approval. I was fighting for the truth about quiet power. I used to think silence was just strategy, a way to endure until the moment was right. But I was wrong. Silence wasn't armor. It was a mirror. In the stillness, I had no one left to argue with, no one to impress. I could only hear myself, my fear, my fury, my longing to be more than what they saw. Silence demanded honesty, not with them, but with me. That was the most dangerous part of it. The final layer was the cruelest, the one that pushed me to the edge. They were pitching to a major VC fund, one of the biggest in Silicon Valley, the kind that could make or break a startup. I wasn't invited. Why would they need their PR girl? But a friend, a junior analyst named Priya, sent me a text during their rehearsal. They said they removed the dead weight. The team's stronger now. Dead weight. Me. The woman who'd secured their first million, who'd stayed up until dawn crafting their vision. I sat on my couch, the phone shaking in my hand, fear flickering, not of them, but of what I was becoming. Was I ready to burn it all down? My answer was yes. This was the truth about silence. Not weakness, but strategy. I met Priya for coffee, her eyes nervous but kind. "They're so confident," she said, stirring her latte. "They think they've won." I nodded, my heart steady. They haven't seen me yet. I dug into their plans, my laptop glowing in the dark. The irony was delicious. Their pitch was to my family's fund, though they didn't know it. I'd been the silent approver all along, reviewing their slides, their budgets, their lies. I pulled their pitch deck from the fund's portal, every word dripping with arrogance. "We've streamlined the team," they wrote. Streamlined. A polite word for betrayal. I found their private chat logs, buried in a shared drive they thought I couldn't access. "Get rid of her before she ruins the pitch," Mark had written. I printed it, the words stark against white paper, my hands steady. I met with Emma and the fund's lead partner, Mr. Grayson, a grizzled man who'd seen every trick in the book. "You're the final sign-off," he confirmed. I nodded, my heart calm. The stage was set. This wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming identity. They'd underestimated me. They'd forgotten I held the keys. The morning of the pitch was crisp, a San Francisco day that felt like a reckoning. I dressed carefully, black blazer, white silk blouse, heels that clicked with purpose. My reflection in the mirror was calm, but my heart raced, a quiet drumbeat of resolve. I walked into the VC fund's boardroom, the air thick with the scent of polished wood and ambition. The co-founders were mid-sentence, their slides glowing on a massive screen, graphs climbing like their egos. Mark was speaking, his voice smooth, confident, his hands gesturing with practiced ease. Then they saw me, their faces froze, Mark's mouth half open, his eyes wide, Tom gripping his pen so tightly it clicked repeatedly, Chris, his hands sliding under the table, nails digging into his suit. This fictional story wasn't about vengeance. It was about reclaiming identity. In my heart, I spoke to them. You underestimated me. This is the truth nobody dares to speak. But in that frozen stare, there was a flicker, just a moment, where Mark's eyes softened, as if he remembered something. Maybe it was our first code sprint, the jokes over instant noodles, the way I used to finish his sentences during pitches. Or maybe it was guilt. But then the mask returned, smooth and controlled. He turned his gaze away. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I took my seat at the head of the table, the fund's lead partner, Mr. Grayson, nodding to me. She's the final sign-off, he said, his tone matter-of-fact. The room went still, the air heavy with their panic. Mark tried to recover, his shoulders squaring, his body leaning forward as if to reclaim the room's center. But his voice faltered, a crack in his armor. Tom's pen clicked faster, a nervous rhythm. Chris stared at the floor, his face pale, as if wishing to disappear. I placed a single sheet of paper on the table, the printed chat log, their words in black and white. Get rid of her before she ruins the pitch. No one spoke. The semantic embedding of their betrayal was their undoing. I looked at each of them, my gaze steady, unflinching. You called me a narcissist, I said, my voice low but clear, cutting through the silence. You said I was good for photos, not strategy, but I gave you the truth you feared. I built this company as much as you did. Every deal, every investor, every late night, it was mine too. They'd thought I was expendable, a prop to be discarded. They'd forgotten the semantic embedding of my stake, the 20% I controlled through the fund. I wasn't sure I still hated them. I felt alive, clear, my purpose sharp without needing to draw blood. They hadn't seen me because they'd never looked. Now I didn't need them to. This was the truth about quiet power. It didn't need to shout. It just needed to be. Mark tried to speak, his voice hoarse. We didn't mean... I raised a hand, stopping him. I didn't need their excuses. I turned to Grayson. The fund has concerns about team integrity, I said. We'll pass. His nod was curt, final. The co-founders sat frozen, their slides meaningless now. Tom's pen fell silent, his hands trembling. Chris's shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on the table. Mark's jaw tightened, his gaze darting to the door, as if plotting an escape. Their confidence, their swagger, their future. It all crumbled in that silent room. I saw his mouth tremble, not from arrogance, but something else. Was it regret? And for a fleeting moment, my hand wavered. What if I lowered it? What if I said, let's start over, instead of, let's end it here? But then I remembered the erased emails, the empty chair at that panel, the silence they'd carved out of my name. My hand steadied. I let the silence speak for me. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I'd already said enough and they hadn't listened. I stood, smoothing my blazer, and walked out, my heels echoing on marble. The door closed behind me and I exhaled, the weight of months lifting. But victory felt hollow. Their faces haunted me, men I'd once called friends, who'd shared my dreams in that cramped garage, their laughter now a distant echo. Had I become the thing I despised? I stood in the lobby, the city's fog pressing against the glass, and thought of my mother's words, "Everything passes, even pain." This was the truth of impermanence, a quiet lesson from the fog that shrouded San Francisco. I'd reclaimed my place, but the scars remained. I wanted to forgive them, to let go, but the wound was still raw. I wasn't sure if I was better than them or just luckier. This was the truth about silence. It could destroy, but it couldn't heal. The fog didn't blind me. It blurred the lines between right and necessary, between justice and vengeance. I used to think clarity was light, but sometimes clarity comes from walking through mist, unsure of the ground beneath. Fog doesn't protect or accuse. It forces you to feel your way forward, to ask, who are you when nothing is certain? That was the question San Francisco's fog whispered again and again. The fallout was swift, like a house collapsing in a storm. I rejected their funding, my email to the fund brief. Concerns about team integrity and leadership. The VC world is a small pond. Whispers spread like ripples. Other investors pulled back, their emails polite but firm. We're reevaluating our priorities. A post on X went viral, an anonymous insider writing, "A co-founder of company just burned the ship. Bad move or genius?" Startup blogs dissected the implosion, their name erased from the industry's radar. They were dropped from the summer conference shortlist, their dream reduced to a cautionary tale. They were finished, not because of money, but because they'd forgotten the truth about silence. Respect isn't optional. It's the foundation. I met Emma for coffee the next day, her eyes sharp but kind, her latte steaming between us. "You didn't have to bury them," she said, stirring slowly. "Maybe not," I replied, "but they buried me first." She nodded, understanding. "Just make sure you're not carrying their poison." Her words lingered, a reminder that revenge doesn't cleanse. It only clears the path. "It'll spread," she said. "This kind of move always does." "Good," I said, my voice steady. "Not to burn, to light the way." Emma raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You're tougher than I thought, kid." A week later, an email arrived from an investor I'd met years ago, a woman who'd liked my pitch but chosen another deal. "I heard what happened," she wrote. "I was wrong to trust them over you. If you start again, I'm in." I stared at the screen, her words a quiet validation. But validation wasn't enough. I sat on a bench by the bay, watching ships vanish into the mist, and felt the weight of my victory. There were no cheers, no applause, only silence. The truth about quiet power was its solitude. I'd won, but the victory tasted bitter, like coffee left too long on the burner. In the startup world, noise is currency. Whoever speaks fastest, loudest, wins the pitch, even if they're bluffing. Silence is seen as doubt. But what if silence isn't fear? What if it's discipline? What if knowing when not to speak is a kind of wisdom no one measures on a slide deck? They had mistaken my quiet for absence. But silence doesn't mean you've disappeared. Sometimes it means you're listening more closely than anyone else in the room. Then Mark texted me, his words desperate. "Why did you do this? We could have worked it out." I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the screen. I saw his face, grinning over pizza in our garage days, now twisted with panic. I felt a pang, not of guilt, but of loss. Then I sent a single emoji. Zipped lips. It carried the semantic embedding of everything I hadn't said, every slight, every lie, every moment they'd underestimated me. Let them wonder. Let them learn. This wasn't predestination. It was consequence. Let them scroll through silence, looking for the sound that never came. Let them sit in boardrooms, waiting for the echo of a voice they once erased. Let them taste their own strategy. It's bitter, I know. I made it sweeter. I didn't celebrate. I walked through San Francisco's streets, the fog wrapping me like an old friend. The pain of their betrayal lingered, a bruise that ached when pressed. I thought of Emma's warning. Had I become them, driven by pride instead of justice? I didn't know, but I'd kept my dignity, my truth. I hadn't lied or manipulated. That was enough. The truth about silence was its clarity. It showed me who I was and who I refused to become. Days later, I sat in my apartment scrolling through emails. One stopped me cold. A young woman, a former intern named Lily, had written, "You showed me women don't have to stay silent. I left my toxic job because of you. Thank you." Her words carried the semantic embedding of hope, a reminder that my actions had rippled beyond revenge. I wasn't just reclaiming identity for myself, I was lighting a path for others. I read her letter again, my eyes stinging. This was the truth about quiet power. It didn't just destroy, it built. That night, I opened my inbox and saw an unexpected name, Tom. His email subject line was blank. The message wasn't long, but it wasn't hollow either. "I know we got caught up in something ugly. I should have said something when they erased you. But I was afraid of losing my job, of being seen as weak. I never thought it would go this far. I hope you're okay. I don't expect forgiveness, just clarity." I stared at the words, torn between resentment and understanding. Tom had always been the quiet one, the cautious one. He hadn't pushed me out, but he hadn't stopped it either. The silence of complicity still cuts. But in his email, there was something else. Not redemption, but recognition. And that, in its own way, mattered. Lily's letter changed how I saw my fictional story. It wasn't just about betrayal or revenge. It was about reclaiming identity in a world that tries to erase you. Lily wrote of her own fight. "I was the marketing assistant told to stay quiet in meetings. I remembered your silence in that magazine feature. Strong, not weak." Her words were a mirror, reflecting the woman I'd become. The pain of being dismissed still stung, but I saw its impermanence, like San Francisco's fog that burns off by noon. This was the truth nobody dares to speak. One voice, one choice can shift the world. You don't have to raise your voice to change the room. Sometimes the loudest legacy is the one that whispers without apology. I started a scholarship for female founders who'd been pushed out of their own dreams. It wasn't about proving myself. It was about ensuring the truth about silence lived on. At the first awards ceremony, held in a small community center, a young woman named Aisha gripped my hand, her eyes bright. "I thought I was alone," she said, her voice trembling as she clutched the microphone, her fingers shaking. "You showed me I wasn't." I saw myself in her. Those early days, unsure how to say, "I have a right to be here." She told me her story. Co-founders who'd mocked her ideas, a startup that pushed her out. Now she was building again, her app a spark in the dark. My heart swelled, heavy with purpose. This was the truth about quiet power. It didn't need applause. It built futures. If I met my co-founders again, I'd say nothing. I'd let my life speak. I'd learn the difference between pride and evil, between justice and cruelty. If a young person asked me how to live, I'd say, respect yourself first, be kind, but don't be silent. I don't need their apologies. My value isn't in their regret. It's in the lives I touch, like Lily's, like Aisha's. The fog of San Francisco doesn't vanish. It retreats, waiting for another day. So do my scars, softened but present. This fictional story isn't about winning. It's about choosing who you become. I let go of bitterness and kept compassion. That's my legacy. That's the truth about silence.